Thank you, Kelsey. And I'm just going to say again that we are recording this webinar. Kelsey will send everyone an email in the near future, and that will contain the recording of this event, along with a list of additional resources, contact info for me and for John, and information about a second Plant Finder webinar that will go into a lot more detail than we are going to have time for today. But today, after some quick introductions, we are going to be talking about why choosing the right species matters. We are going to talk about factors that will determine which species are going to thrive at your site. And we are going to talk about how to use the Plant Finder tool to create a species list. And we are going to have a lot of time at the end for questions. So again, if you could just hold on to those for the end, that would be really great. We're hoping for a lot of discussion. And then you can also drop your questions into the chat box at any time, like Kelsey said, and then we'll circle back to those at the end. John, do you want to start us off with introductions?
Sure thing. Good evening, everyone. Hello. I'm John Bly. I'm the Director of Operations and Special Projects at Metro Blooms. Metro Blooms operates the Blue Thumb Planting for Clean Water and Pollinators education program. You can find it online at bluethumb.org. And one of the special projects I was the director of was the redevelopment of our Plant Finder tool, which is what we're all here to talk about today.
Thanks, John. And then I'm Jessy Carlson. I'm associated with the University of Minnesota. I'm a Sea Grant Resilience Extension Associate. And this webinar is part of a Sea Grant Green Infrastructure Code Audit project, and that involves 13 municipalities in the Duluth area and along the North Shore. And you can learn more about this project if you check out this project website. So let's get started with plants. First of all, I want to note that non-native plants have all sorts of value. I personally love growing lavender and zinnias, but today we are just going to discuss native species. And what we mean when we say native is any plant that is part of a balance of nature that has developed over hundreds or sometimes thousands of years in one particular region or ecosystem. We are going to be talking about plants that are native to Minnesota, but note that a species native to one part of Minnesota could be non-native to another. So why does it matter to choose the right native species? What could possibly go wrong if I just grab whatever happens to be available at the hardware store this weekend? So let's say I live in far northeastern Minnesota and I'm building a rain garden. I want to absorb runoff from my driveway, especially in the early spring when all the snow melts. And let's say my sister, who lives in far southwestern Minnesota, gifts me this really beautiful native plant, and I'm really excited about including it in my rain garden. Unfortunately, because this is a shooting star plant, it is drought hardy. It's from a much drier region, and it doesn't have any salt tolerance. So the water that's collecting in the rain garden and the salt in the snow melt kills it. So this is an example of a species not being right for the site. Some site factors that we will get into later include things like ecoregion. And that means where's the plant from and where are you located? There are other site factors that we can call environmental stresses, and these are things that plants may or may not have adapted to. So that would include things like not having enough water or having too much water or too much salt. So the shooting star plant that I got from my sister is also an example of a mismatch between a plant and a project. So I should have first thought about the goals of my project. So I wanted to build a rain garden that could handle snowmelt. Then I should have thought about the adaptations that might allow a plant to help me accomplish those goals. So some plants have developed ways to pull amazing amounts of water out of the soil when the soil is temporarily flooded. Other plants, or sometimes the same plants, are capable of special physiological tricks like sweating excess salt out of their leaves. So, choosing the right species boils down to matching the right plant with the right site with the right project. And that is actually pretty easy to do because we have this online tool that is designed to help us do that. Plant Finder, it draws from a database of 334 Minnesota native plants. And this is a narrowed down list of all the native plants in the state because it is limited to just the plants that are likely to be available for purchase in the state of Minnesota. We are going to be using this tool today, and you are going to be able to ask us questions about it. So this tool was developed with the involvement of Minnesota DNR, Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources, University of Minnesota, and Blue Thumb. It's designed to be used by both municipal stormwater practitioners, but also the average gardener. And as we mentioned a little bit earlier, our very own John Bly led the tool's recent redesign and update, and we're really lucky to have him here today to answer all of our questions about Plant Finder. So here's how it works. You tell Plant Finder what your site is like and what your project is like, and then it generates a list of species that match your site and your project description. So that means you are going to want to know more about all of these fields and the criteria that you'll be selecting from within those fields. Today, we are going to focus just on the basic search fields, and then we are going to highlight only one of the advanced search fields because we think that you are going to find it useful. So the first field is plant type, and this refers to growth form. So that means you could generate a list of ferns, you could generate a list of forbs, and we should stop right here and talk about what a forb is. So a forb is a plant that is herbaceous, and that means it is not woody. A forb at some point in its life cycle will make showy flowers because forbs need to attract animal pollinators. And their leaves and stems died back to the ground each year. So basically, forbs are any plant that we might commonly call a wildflower. So the next option is grasses. And Plant Finder is including sedges and rushes in with the true grasses, just in case there are any graminoid nerds in our audience today. So grasses, sedges, and rushes, they all have tiny flowers instead of the large showy flowers like forbs do, because they don't need to attract insect pollinators. They're wind pollinated instead. So sedges and rushes look just like a grass with all those tiny, tiny flowers, but grasses have hollow stems. Sedges and rushes stems are not hollow. But again, all three are going to be found in the Plant Finder tool under grass. The next two plants have woody stems and do not die back to the ground each winter. So we're talking about shrubs and trees. So when is a shrub not a tree in the Plant Finder tool? A shrub will have multiple main stems, whereas a tree has a single main stem or trunk. You can generate a list that includes vines and vining plants. And again, any botany nerds out there, Plant Finder uses this category for any vining plant. So that means it could have a woody stem or herbaceous stem. The next field is height at maturity, and you can slide the boxes at either end of this yellow bar to select a range of heights. And you are going to want a range of heights for a couple of reasons. A whole bunch of different heights can provide structure in your garden. And you might want a visual screen. You might want your plants to be blocking your view of something. You might want short plants to protect the soil. And then if you live in town and you're planting within a boulevard or on a street corner, you want to be sure to check with your city or town to see if there are any height limits that might affect which plants you're going to want to choose for that planting. The next field is light exposure. So how much sun does your site get each day? Full sun would be more than 6 hours. Part sun is 3 to 6. And shade means less than 3 hours of direct sunlight. Then we have soil moisture. And this means if it's dry, it never has standing water on it. So if we get a really heavy downpour, it drains really quickly. You're not going to see any standing water on that spot. If it's medium, there might be standing water, but it will drain within a day or two. And if it's wet, it's often saturated. And after a heavy downpour, it may not drain within 2 days. So the next field, bloom color, this is a really good example of a field that you could choose to skip. So if you selected a couple of bloom colors, that would make your species list shorter than if you skipped this field altogether. So any of the fields in here, you can skip them. You do not have to make selections in every field. And another example of that is the next one. The general resilience field applies to urban infrastructure projects. So you could skip this one too, but you want to make sure that it is set at 2 to 10 so you aren't accidentally shortening your species list. If anyone in the audience wants more information on the factors that are included in that general resilience score, those are all listed in the About section. We are going to go into more detail into things like that in an upcoming Plant Finder webinar, and that is going to be tailored for professional land use practitioners and anyone else who's really curious and just doesn't mind getting really into the weeds on some of this stuff. Okay, so we introduced this term earlier, ecoregion. This is all about where you're located in Minnesota. We could divide the map of Minnesota in a million different ways, but Plant Finder's basic search uses the ecoregion system. If you go into the Plant Finder tool and you look on the first page, there is this button, the green button in the middle that says Map of Minnesota Ecoregions. If you click on that, you will see this map. So you are going to want to know which ecoregion you live in. If you find out that your location is on the edge between two ecoregions, think about which type of landscape you're trying to create. So are you trying to create more of a woodland or are you trying to create more of a prairie? So I am in Northern Lakes and Forests. Give you a minute to take a look at that. But you can always look at that in the Plant Finder tool later as well. Okay, so if you want, and remember, you don't have to, you can click on the advanced search. And remember, use just the fields that matter to you. If you don't know what something means, you can skip it. If you think it doesn't matter to you, you can skip it as well. Today, we're just going to be using herbivore sensitivity. And this describes whether a plant can withstand being chewed on or not. So low means that the plant is not sensitive. It can handle some pretty significant munching. High sensitivity would mean it cannot handle significant munching. So plants in the low sensitivity category, they may have adapted to withstand deer browse or grazing by rabbits and hares. And in some cases, this could include plants that are really good for Canada goose territory. So we are going to take all of that information and take this thing for a test drive, and we are going to make a species list. And John is going to do that for us. Let me stop sharing so John can share us his screen.
All right, everyone with me looking at the plant finder? Um,
Great.
okay, let's give this a test run. Let's say that I'm in Minneapolis, and let's say that I have a rain garden at the side of my house. It's partly shady, and I don't get a lot of I haven't seen any flowers bloom in it yet this year. Um, So, and I want to see some more early bloomers because I know that I've seen bumblebees out for months now, and I know they're out there looking for something. So, I'm going to use a tool. I'm going to select forbs because we know those are the ones with the showy flowers for pollinators. Um, in this case, I don't particularly care how tall a plant is. I just want it to bloom early. Um, I know that my garden is partly sunny. It gets between 3 and 6 hours of sunlight a day. Um, when it is sunny, it's been awfully cloudy lately. Um, and Minneapolis has very sandy soils. I never see standing water um, in my rain garden even. So I'm going to choose dry soil moisture. Um, and then let's see. I should have paid attention. Um, we're in the north central hardwood forest here. Um, and then as far as early bloomers, we're going to go into the advanced search and I'm going to look for flowers that bloom in March, April, May, and June. Um, one thing to note about the plant finder, I mean, every plant's different. Even, one individual plant from another plant of the same species. And so we're talking, heights or just estimates of what a plant can grow. Bloom months are very dependent on where in the state you are. Things start blooming a lot earlier down in the driftless area than they do north of Duluth. Um, but for this case, I'm just looking for early bloomers. So um, we will find the plants and let's see what kind of options we have out there. Um, so we've got 37 plants matching my criteria. That's great. Um, uh, and we look through it. We see some good looking plants that I could get in here. Some wild ginger and columbine. Love me some columbine. Um, some of these plants I have in my garden and they definitely aren't blooming yet. On second thought, I probably shouldn't have selected June uh, in the bloom month list. I should have looked for earlier bloomers. So we can go back and take that away. And I might think to myself, and I might think, honestly, I also want to see these. I want to put them up at the front of my garden. And so I also want to make sure that they're not too tall because I don't want really tall plants right at the front of my garden blocking the rest of the garden from my view. So maybe I want to limit them to 3 feet. Um, and we can see how many plants we get that way. Um, and now we have 25 plants for me to choose from, which is great because I'm terrible with choices and the fewer options I have, the better. Um, so this is one example of how you could use the plant finder. This is me looking for a couple species of plants to put in my garden. You can also use a plant finder to come up with a plant list for a whole new garden that you're planning. In which case, you'd want to look at all 25 of the plants in this list or, your list and filter it down. Um, and it helps if you're planning a whole garden to maybe think of it in terms of zones of your garden, if there are different parts of it that get more sun than others. If they're, like I mentioned, I'm putting these plants in the front of my garden, so I want them short. Um, we always say you want to build your gardens like the school photos. You want the shorter ones up front and the taller ones in the back so you can see everybody. And so maybe when you're building your lists, you filter by height and you come up with like a short zone and a medium zone and a long zone. And then you also can use it to check for plants you want to bloom in a certain time of year, which is really good. Like I mentioned in my example, we have our state bee, the rusty patch bumblebee, is active from April to October, November potentially, and she's out there looking for food, and so it's up to us to make sure that she'll find something. So this is one example of how we can use the plant finder. We're definitely going to have time for questions and we can walk through some more of this too. But once you have your list of plants, what next? Well, you need to find a place to buy them. Your local hardware store might be selling plants. They might be selling native plants. That's cool. And then you're lucky to find them so easy and close. It's not always easy to find native plants, and sometimes when you find someone selling native plants, you'll find that the plants have been treated with neonicotinoids or other insecticides that will harm the very pollinators you might be trying to help with your planting. And so it's important when you're buying native plants, when you're buying plants to help pollinators, you check with the retailer and you make sure that those plants aren't treated with insecticides that will harm the very insects you're trying to help. So at Blue Thumb, we have a native plant nursery list that we've been developing. We also run the Lawns to Legumes program. It's a $400 grant program for Minnesotans to create pollinator habitat in their yard. And we've been creating this list of nurseries that we're in contact with and vetting, making sure that they can help grantees go through the program and meet all the steps, which include supplying native plants without insecticides. And so we have this list here on our site that you can get to, again, from the top of the plant finder page, this blue button, Minnesota Native Plant Nurseries. And many of these nurseries offer online ordering. And if you are, or you can kind of search for nurseries in your area by region. And this page isn't split up by eco-region. It's just kind of splitting the state into quarters. So if we jump to northern Minnesota, we can see there's who's only in northern Minnesota, Shoreview Natives and Hammerland Landscape Nursery. In addition to, there's other nurseries that again ship statewide. Though it is always nice to support your local nurseries, and it's also recommended to source plants from as close as you can to your project site. Plants that you can have a same species of plant that's native 300 miles south of you, but plant nerds talk about ecotypes as it's not a subspecies, it's the same species, but the plant might have different traits depending on where in its ecoregion it's growing. Sandy or loamy or clay or wet soils, etc. And so getting plants that are closer to you is a better bet that they're going to thrive in your project site. So this isn't the only place you can search for plants. Jesse's got another list to share with you. But you're muted, Jessy.
Thank you, John. Okay, so we've also got this other really great website where you can look for native plant nurseries, and this is the DNR's way of listing native plant nurseries. And this will be shared to you in an email, so don't worry about writing it down now. But if you go there, you'll get to this website here. And then if I were to click on northeastern Minnesota, because that is where I am located, it'll open up a PDF. And the DNR's list of the nurseries in northeastern Minnesota goes on for 5 pages, and it's tabulated like this, so you can learn a lot about that nursery or all of those nurseries. So you've got 2 places you can figure out where you're going to be buying your native plants. Once you have your list made, you might also want some help designing, installing, and maintaining your plantings. So if you are in Cook or Lake County, I happen to know that your SWCDs, your soil water conservation districts, they are planning a hands-on shoreland buffer planting workshop this autumn. It will be in person on Devil Track Lake. You'll be able to get your hands dirty. But for anyone else in Minnesota, or even if you're in Cook or Lake County, general technical advice, it's always a great idea to connect with your local SWCD to get started. They would be really happy to hear from you. But also, if you'd like to just read up on the internet about how to build a whole variety of gardens, go to Blue Thumb's project planning website. And there you will find information about how to design, how to do the site preparation, how to maintain anything from a rain garden all the way to container plantings to a shoreland buffer. Okay, quick review. Why does choosing the right species matter? Well, we don't want our plants to die, and getting the right plant for the right site and the right project will increase the likelihood of that plant thriving at our site. And what factors will determine which species will thrive? Well, we talked about making sure we have the right plant for the right site for the right project. And then using the plant finder tool to create a species list. You're going to go to bluethumb.org plant finder. And I want to mention that we only had time today for a really basic overview of the plant finder basics. We are going to be presenting a second webinar later this summer that'll get into a lot more detail than we had time for today. It'll dig into a lot of the ecological and conservation concepts underneath a lot of those fields and criteria. So if you are a stormwater or land use practitioner, or if you're just really curious about some of those advanced search fields, watch for that event. That'll also be happening through Cook County Higher Ed. It'll be on Sea Grant's website. And you'll probably get an email with dates and registration links when we have them. All right, so now we've got plenty of time for questions. So you can use the raise hand feature to ask a question. You can use the chat box. And also probably during this time, Kelsey might drop a really short survey into the chat. You don't have to do that right now, and we'll probably email it to you again later. But we would really like to know what worked or didn't work for you today. We would really appreciate your feedback. So, any questions?
We don't have any yet in the chat, but you're welcome to unmute yourself again as you wish, or you're welcome to put the question in the chat. A good way to think of a question you might have would be like, I'm looking to plant something in X spot and I want to know more information about that. And we will do our best to answer those questions through a demo.
Yeah, you've got pretty awesome expert to help you plan your garden right now. We've got plenty of time to figure it out.
While people are thinking things through, I would love for you to do a quick little demo for me. Is that going to be you, John, or is that going to be you, Jessy?
I think that'll be John.
John, you're up.
I've been voluntold. Here we go. Kelsey, what are you looking for?
Yeah, I have a house that has very dry ground next to the house. And we are looking for some sort of shrubs that will cover some unpleasant wall areas of the house. And it is mostly shaded. And those are sort of my basics, but we have deer that come through our yard. So I'm thinking maybe it's something that's a little resistant potentially.
Okay. All right, let's see.
And the house is red. So, you know, if it's not not something that would be bad colored next to go next to a red house.
Herbivore sensitivity, let's say looking for low, we'll accept medium sensitive. And are you up in the northern lakes and forests, Kelsey?
I sure am.
Okay.
And I love stuff that's low maintenance too. So anything that doesn't require a ton of me. That's some magic.
Shrubs are a great choice for that. So I'm gonna search. I did choose part sun and full shade. And we'll see even after you select, the plant finder is built so that of the categories that you kind of add a filter to, you can view the plants as a gallery, or you can also look at them as a table. And it will show you, it will try to show you the categories of information that you're interested in. And so, for instance, we know we're interested in light exposure, so we can look and we can make sure that there are shrubs that do well in full shade, even if that's what you need. And we have 14 different shrubs to offer you, Kelly.
Well, that's a lot to choose from, but you know, when I'm trying to cover stuff, I think I definitely want the taller ones.
Okay,
is there any way
yes.
that I can sort that by clicking on the height button so that I can sort it a little bit that way?
So actually, for the trees and shrubs, the height filter is really only met for the herbaceous plants. So it actually gets hidden when you start looking for shrubs. But there's not too many options, so we can look through them. And we can even sort them by height, and we
I
can
love
sort
that you
them
can
by the
sort things
tallest.
because that's kind of a cool tool after the fact to be able to sort.
So looking at this, hazelnuts are good down to part sun, and they'll block a lot if they're happy. But if you need something in full shade, we've got red elderberries and dogwood, 2 types of dogwood. And then we're getting down into the shorter ones. So like dwarf bush honeysuckle only goes to 4 feet, and that's probably not tall enough for you. So in reality, we have red osier dogwood, gray dogwood, and red elderberry that that we would recommend to you for a full shade environment.
But how fun to be able to sort those, because like if I wanted to sort by color first, I could look at the color and get those kind of grouped together, and that would make it easier for me to be selecting things without having to do a ton of work. And then another question, I know that we didn't ask this last time, but is there a way to print it out easily at all?
Oh, no. not built into the tool. Your browser might be able to um, I use Firefox, and you can take a screenshot of a full page, which would give you all of it. That's definitely something, that's feedback that we got pretty late in the game. But next time we do any major development to it, we want to add a way to just like, export a simple spreadsheet of your plant lists and stuff.
Well, I think if the free function of it is a little bit of challenge to print, I think that's totally worth every moment of my time, right? There is some questions in the chat, so I want to ask before we get going, because there might be some other people that have questions. Thank you for helping me answer my questions about what I could do around my house, and I look forward to trying those out. We have a question we received the Lawn to Legumes grant and are planning to use it for a shoreline restoration project. We had Joe, high weed that the bumblebees loved. Do we add seeds or plant established plants? Our shoreline was unfortunately moved by a large ice ridge. Our cabin is in Grand Rapids area.
Joe Pyeweed's great. Okay, so I hear, so the main question is seeds or plants.
Yeah, seeds are established plants.
And it sounds like there are some environmental difficulties that you experience on the lake with the ice ridge. You know, Metro Blooms does a lot of gardens in and around Minneapolis, and we almost only use plants because they are quicker to establish themselves, and they lend themselves as they're establishing. They're easier to, you plant them maybe not in a perfectly square grid, but they're offset, but you plant them in a way that the spacing is clear, that you have intended plants, which makes it easier to weed around them and pull out the volunteer weeds. So there's a lot to be said, a lot of benefits for planting with plants. We do use usually small plants. We get the 4-inch plants, the plugs, because a larger plant, you pay a lot more and the bang for your buck isn't quite there. That said, seeds are much cheaper, and you can cover a lot more ground with them. So if your project is on the large side, you don't even have to choose. They're not exclusive options. You could put a few plants in the ground to get you started and seed some more to come up along the way, as long as you're not going to be pulling them all up when they're little seedlings and you can't identify them yet. Jessy, do you have anything to add?
We are on to next question if Jessy doesn't have something.
I'm just thinking about ice heave, and I know that there is some information about dealing with ice heave and shoreline buffer plantings on the DNR's website. I can't remember what is on that web page. I just remember it exists. So this is Amelia. I can try to find, I know I can find that web page and I could send it to you.
Well, that sounds awesome. And then we have a question here, thinking about pollinator gardens versus rain gardens. Will there be a different plants selected for each? For example, are there plants that are better for rain gardens because they take up more water or have deeper root systems? Just wondering if there's a way to differentiate goals, stormwater runoff versus pollinators.
Now, okay, this is where the caveat comes in that Jesse was very kind in calling me an expert in the plant finder. I did help develop the tool, but that was really wrangling a bunch of plant experts to get the information we needed. So I am not a plant expert. That said, um, I would say that there is a very healthy overlap between plants for rain gardens and plants for pollinators. Um, uh, and I think the kind of edge that where the overlap where it doesn't overlap, I think would be that grasses often have very deep roots. And some of them are super happy to colonize a rain garden. And even though grasses can be important for hosting nests and larvae of pollinators, they don't produce pollen and nectar for the adults. And so that might be one type of plant that if you didn't care about pollinators, you maybe would have some more grasses in your garden. We like to make sure that every garden has both grasses and forbs. The grasses, even if they're not as showy, help support the forbs, and then all the benefits they do below ground are worth it too.
Awesome. We have another question in here. Do you have a strategy for evaluating light exposure at a site over time?
I asked our lead designer about this because I was wondering, because I mean, so my yard, for instance, I have an apartment building to my south, and so my side yard is full sun in July, but September rolls around and the sun gets lower in the sky and it's like full shade. So, there is no perfect answer besides just observing it. If you can through the year, or if you've taken pictures of it in the past at different points in the year, you could take a look at how the shadows lie. But essentially, I would go out onto the site. I would look south, and I would imagine where the sun is roughly in the sky, from east to west, and see what is on the horizon there that's going to block the sun from getting to that site. And that'll give you at least an okay way of guessing how much light your site is going to get. The sun travels about the width of a hand. Every hour is about the width of a hand, an arm's shouldn't do that. An arm's width, an arm's length away from your face. So don't look into the sun, but you could measure palm widths across the open area of the sky if you wanted to guesstimate how many hours. But know that, the sun has a higher arc in the summer and a lower arc later in the growing season. That's an art.
Those are some great questions. Please feel free to continue putting them in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask a question, we welcome you to do so. We are in the last bits of this event, so just want to make sure we're getting your questions addressed if you have one. I always think a good teacher pause, right? We just appreciate this tool, John and Jesse. This is such a great resource for everybody to be using for both professional and personal use, and for all the pieces of either just doing a small spot or a much larger piece in a yard or garden. Any last things you guys want to talk about before the session's over today?
This is just me because I'm an information sponge. John, would you mind showing people what happens if you click on one of those species?
Oh my gosh, I'm still screen sharing. uh,
Perfect.
yeah, here. So if we want to learn a little more about red elderberry, we have an individual plant page profile, plant profile page, where we can read a few notes about it. We can see if it goes by any other common names. We always recommend when you're ordering plants to refer to them by the scientific or Latin name, because there are common names that don't always, it's not a one-to-one match all the time. So, but the AKA is there to, let you know that it might have a few different names. And then there's some more information, a lot more information there than you could see when you were looking at the table of all your different plant ideas. And so, um, again, maybe more information than any one person needs for any one project, but depending on what you're interested in, this is kind of all the information that we've gathered about the plant right there.
Hey, John, I kind of remembered, what happens if I pick a bunch of the selections of things when I'm doing the selecting on the previous page? And, I'm not seeing anything that's like, I only get one result, but I might have more results if maybe I picked less, or do you have the option to go back and maybe unclick some things?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good question. So you start out with 334 plants, and every selection that you make in these categories is a filter that is applied to those to exclude the ones that don't meet your criteria. And it is very easy to get too specific and limit your choices. So if we were looking for forbs that were 3 feet tall and sunny in wet soils, and we wanted yellow, or let's say pink flowers, because we're doing this for my mom's garden and she loves the color pink. How many options will we have? We'll have one plant that meets our criteria. And it's got purple in the name, so who knows how pink that flower really is. And so you can always go back up and select a few more colors, or change your criteria and hit the find plant buttons again. And that will give you a few more options and kind of open up the search criteria that you've been filtering through.
I love that, especially thinking about like what might be more like a deer might come and eat. I'm like, well, how much does that really matter? Maybe that isn't the most priority. Maybe I want pink flowers more. So it kind of, you have some ability to go back and think about what you value the most when you're planting.
Yeah, maybe some people need to have their Vikings pride on display in their garden, and they just stick to purple and yellow.
I mean, come on, that seems like a direct choice. We should be all doing that. Oh, well, I appreciate all the knowledge you guys have had and shared with us all. And again, you're welcome to ask questions if anybody has any last ones. But if not, I want to say thank you for your time and this beautiful evening to be sitting here together discussing what we could be planting, how we can be planting it, where we can be planting it.